Hi, I'm Maria Fleming. I'm General Manager of Dublin Theatre Festival.
Hello, Maria Fleming. How are you? I have to kind of come clean here. I was on stage with Maria Fleming a no, sorry, I was directed by Maria Fleming a long time
That's
ago.
me, yes.
Sorry, sorry, she was my boss a long time ago in Dramstock. God, yeah, different times. Maria, when you were younger, was theatre in your house, in your blood? Was it kind of something that was there, or?
Well, I've had the experience now, Mark, of watching you do a few of these already, so I was slightly prepared for this question. And I was thinking about it. So in my house when I was growing up, I tortured my family every night at bedtime, and I insisted on performing ballet for everybody, and everybody in the family had to attend and watch me dance before I'd go to bed. So there was a brief period of time where I was determined I was going to be a ballerina. But no, it wasn't something that I thought of as a career theatre, but I was taken to the theatre as a child, and we used to go to see light opera in the Gaiety and opera sometimes, and we'd be taken to shows that I think would have been called variety shows in the Olympia.
Yeah.
And I do remember one time as a child, there was one time we were in the Gaiety and we got to sit in a box, and I was very excited sitting in a box in the Gaiety. And there was a performer on stage and she was singing a song and she had a fan that she was fanning herself, and the words of the song were on the back of the fan. And it just, for me, the magic just went. I remember the disappointment, and like that really, obviously it's still sticking with me, that breaking of the magic of what theatre and live performance can be. So that's one of my earliest memories. But I would have been around the arts. We were all sent for piano lessons. I went to dancing lessons in order to be able to torture my family with my nightly performances. So the arts were a big part of my childhood, but felt more like a hobby or something outside of school or outside of career. And then I suppose it was only really, yeah, probably through Dramsoc that I started thinking, could I, would I, is this something?
And were you always like, was that, because you mentioned there about the kind of fan and noticing a fan? I mean, it's interesting that, you know, so much of your career has been in kind of, organizing and facilitating and developing art, and kind of, was that kind of, even, when you were doing the ballet, was there also like, were you academic in school? Were you into organizing things back then as well?
Are you asking me, was I bossy, Mark? Is that the question?
Sorry, how would I ever?
So yes, I was bossy as a child. No, interestingly, like through the time in Dramsoc, like Dramsoc was amazing, wasn't it? The opportunities that you got. So you got an opportunity. I wrote while I was in Dramsoc. I directed. I performed. I operated lights. I put up the posters. I was front of house manager on the committee one time. So you got to see a bit of every side of theatre. And then after college and UCD, I went to Galway, initially just for a summer. But I always say that Galway is a disease, not a place, you catch it. So I went to Galway for a summer and escaped 9 years later. And when I was down in Galway, I completed college, but I actually went backwards a bit and I joined Galway Youth Theatre, because Galway Youth Theatre, unlike some of the other youth theatres around the country, went up to older ages. I can't remember what the cut-off age is, but I would have been a fair age by that, leaving college. And I was actually in Galway Youth Theatre with Lachlan Deegan and Nolene Kavanagh of Mockness now. So they were the years that I was in Galway Youth Theatre. And at that time, I was very interested in either being a performer or a director or being directly involved with the theatre making. And I did a course through Galway Youth Theatre to become a workshop facilitator. And I was sent on placement to the Abbey Theatre and to work with Maureen Hughes in the casting department. And I suddenly thought, well, there's this other side of theatre that you can be involved in. And I'd had the experience at that point of doing a number of auditions, professional auditions, and always like threw up before or after the audition. didn't deal at all well with any rejection. So there was something in me that was going, maybe the stage is not for me. But I was intrigued by my experience with Maureen Hughes. So if you're watching, Maureen, you're responsible. And I went back to college and did the Arts Admin course in UCG. UCG at the time, NUIG now, and then started from there. My placement when I was in NUIG was with Druid Theatre Company under Jane Daly, who I wanted to be when I grew up, and it took off from there. Yeah.
And go back there a bit. In what did you study initially in UCD?
I studied psychology, which came in very useful for the career in theatre.
Absolutely, I'd say it did. Yes, master manipulator.
Although my mother does claim, my mother always says, you've got a degree in Dramsoc. Well, if I'm honest, that's what my degree was in. I spent more time in the LGs, as Willie White said when he was on here as well. My college days were spent in the LGs, the lower ground floors in UCD.
I think there was a few of us in I think talk to any of our parents, I think you'd find a similar answer.
Yeah.
And so when you went to Galway and ended up staying there, like, did you find? Sorry, I suppose an awful lot of people think about kind of, you said about finding things and kind of finding new ways of looking at something that you thought you wanted and kind of finding out acting what wasn't for you. But was there a vibe around the theatre scene that you were kind of drawn to? Like, was there a feeling you got from being around it?
Yeah, I mean, Galway was very vibrant at the time, still is, but at the time there was a, kind of a carny feel about it, circus folk or something, and it felt like people rolled into town and rolled out of town. So some of my colleagues like yourself and Willie White and Derva Crotty and people that I had been through Dramsoc with and Niamh Daly and that were forming theatre companies up in Dublin that I was aware of, and then I was getting drawn into the scene down in Galway, which was the Flying Pigs, was one of the theatre companies down there with Tommy Tiernan and Nolene Kavanagh again, and I was in a company called Clockwork Theatre Company. So there was a similar scene to Dublin, but I suppose with Galway being on a smaller scale, there was maybe more fluidity in it and a smaller arts community. And there was that kind of, to me, Galway compared to Dublin felt more carny, more lawless. There was a lot of meetings for theatre companies that took place in pubs as opposed to offices.
Yeah. I think it was kind of, I think, that catching the disease thing is well put, and also going down there for a month and ended up coming back years later. I think it wasn't too long before that, I think that Mike Scott and the Waterboys went down to record an album and ended up, decamping there for his fiddle.
Exactly, yeah, there was that feel about it. And there was like the Galway Arts Festival and the Mockness parades and the film festival. It was a very exciting time to be around Galway. And one of my first jobs when I got out of college was working with the Galway Municipal Theatre Trust, which is a very grandiose name for the fundraising for the Town Hall Theatre. So I worked with Etna Verling there in an organisation that was trying to do the fundraising for the building of the Black Box Theatre and the Town Hall Theatre. So that was a very exciting time to be there. But I had, like, during the time in Dramsoc, I don't know if you were around for the ISDA that was in Galway. We were all staying in the Warwick Hotel for it, which is recently demolished. But so during my time in UCD, one of the ISDAs was held down in Galway and a gang of us went down. And I remember we didn't go to see a play in Druid Lane, but we did go in and have a look around the theatre and looking at the posters. And I remember like being in awe and thinking, yeah, this is where I want to be. I want to be involved in something like this. So I was delighted years later to come back and work in Druid Theatre Company.
And what did you go and study in NUIG? What were you doing there?
So it was arts administration. It was a postgraduate in arts administration.
And did that kind of, it's interesting, did that kind of serve that piece of your brain to kind of go, okay, there's order here as well as the wildness. There's a bit of order I can kind of grab onto.
Yeah, it suited me to look at, getting into maybe the administration and management side of the arts. And I also got exposure because at that time I was theatre, and I started in my arts admin course, and there was a class of 12 of us, and there was people from a visual art background, film background, dance background. So it broadened my ideas out a bit. I remained working in theatre all the time, but it was lovely to have conversations with people around other art forms. And our social life for that year revolved around, we attended like the opening of an envelope if it was happening in Galway. The arts admin class would turn up. We were good for numbers, and we could talk about whatever the art was, but that was where we got our dinner and our wine for the night, was that whatever was opening in Galway that week, we were all there.
And were you in Galway long after you kind of graduated? Was there kind of like, what was the timeline around that, Maria?
Yeah, so I stayed around Galway for a long time. So after I graduated from the arts admin course, I did a few different kind of freelance jobs, and I was still involved with this theatre company, Clockwork Theatre Company, and I was now a workshop facilitator for Galway Youth Theatre. So having come in through Galway Youth Theatre, I went back and taught in Galway Youth Theatre, and then my dream job came up, which was administrator of Druid.
Yeah.
And I nearly missed the chance to get the position because I had applied. I travelled over to West Africa, to the Gambia, to work on a cultural festival there, and the timing where I was going to be there was going to clash with the interviews for the position, but something happened and the interviews got pushed out anyway, so I managed to get an interview and started working with Druid Theatre Company then. Yeah,
I love the way you just dropped that in there, you know. And I was over in Gambia, you know.
Just hopped over to the Gambia and West Africa to work at a festival.
Yeah, how did that come about?
So my brother Brian is a drummer, and he'd gone over to Senegal to train in djembe drumming, and he went over then a number of years. He was over and back, and while he was over there, he bumped into Savio Sequere. Did you ever come across Savio, who used to do the Shakespeare in the Park?
Yeah.
And Savio was over working with what was then APSO, an Irish aid agency, and he was going to be working on a cultural festival. They were the first cultural placements that APSO had made. So they had sent over a curator, an archaeologist, a theatre producer in Savio, and a journalist. So these were cultural placements that from Ireland sent over to the Gambia and West Africa. And Savio was going to be working on a cultural festival there. And Brian met him when he was over in Senegal and told me when he came back, and I contacted Savio and said, could I come over and work on that? And I applied to James Harold, who is the Galway Arts Officer, and to Phelim Donnellan in the Arts Council, and I got some funding to go over. So I went over and worked in the Gambia for a couple of weeks. It was a wild experience now, really amazing. I didn't know what I was doing half the time. And the way that business was done in West Africa was very different to the way that business was done in Dublin or Galway. So I was playing catch up all the time at the meetings that I was in. And when the festival opened, it opened in a stadium in Banjul in the Gambia, and there were different tribes came from all over the country and performed their traditional dance. It was a really beautiful display. And then somebody just grabbed me and put me standing in the line. And the next thing I knew, I was shaking hands with the military dictator of the Gambia, Yahya Jammeh. So, yeah, wild times.
Wild times. You thought Galway was mad and then you went to Gambia.
Exactly, yeah. It was great. It was a great experience. I went back over a couple of times for visits and just to hang out. And I actually, had ideas when I was over there. I was going, oh, maybe I'd like to do this. Maybe I'd like to get a full-time position over here. And then I got the job in Druid, so that took precedence. So then I just went back on holidays then to meet up with some of the people I'd worked with over there.
We'll talk about it in a few minutes, but I think it's interesting because that there's a kind of a, the the area of social justice and kind of in the international aspect of that has kind of gone through your whole career. But I think it's I mean, and not just on an international basis, but I think it's fascinating when you get that experience, you know, youngish, that you can kind of, you know, it's a reality to it. Like, it's not, you know, because you go and see different cultures, and if you're actually working there, you do know the fluidity between the state and the general public is kind of weird. Yeah.
And it was interesting because being in the Gambia was an English colony. And before I left, the Minister for Culture, Susan Wafa-Oga was her name, and it was great that there was a female Minister for Culture in the Gambia at the time, and she had grown up with Yahya Jammeh, who was the leader. He was still, I think, technically a military dictator when I was there, and he later officially became president, and then finally ran away from the country with some money, I think, a few years ago. But the Minister for Culture asked to meet me before I left, and I remember sitting down in her office and talking to her, and because the Gambia had been a British colony, you know, I was saying to her, you know, there's lots of things that I find similar here. Some of the experiences being Irish and being Gambian, there was a lot that was different, but there was a lot that was the same. And she said to me, she said, I think we probably share one other very important experience, Maria. Would you know what that is? And I said, no. And she said, we were probably both educated by Irish Catholic nuns. And no more needed to be said on that.
Yes. And then, you know, the dream, you know, at the time, working in that amazing space in Church Lane, you know, it comes off the walls in there. It really, really does. You can kind of, that must have been an absolute joy, Maria, was it?
It was just a dream. I couldn't believe when I got the job, and it was at like such an exciting time. So the Beauty Queen of Leenane had already happened. That had happened the year before I joined. But now, Druid, we're going to go on and do the Leenane trilogy. So 3 Martin McDonagh plays that we're going to open in Galway, play in Dublin, London, New York, Sydney, and I was going to be involved and across all of that, and it was wild times, and we worked hard and we played hard, and we had a great time. Yeah, it was a really exciting time. So like, to be fresh out of college and my first real professional theatre gig, working as administrator in Druid, and get to be involved in West End opening, a Broadway opening. Sure, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven.
Yeah, just resign then or retire. It's kind of
it's hard to follow that. Yeah.
And did you get to travel? Did you get to kind of go with the shows where you?
I did. So we the production was a co-production with the Royal Court in London, and from very early on in the process, in order to make it, like, you know, as smooth a process as possible, there was a lot of exchange, staff from the Royal Court travelling over to Galway to get an understanding about Druid Theatre Company. We would bring them out on trips to Connemara, you know, explain to them what turf was, show them the bog. And then similarly, I would be sent over to London to have meetings with my counterpart in Royal Court. So it was fantastic. And then I got to travel to New York. So the Beauty Queen of Leenane played off Broadway first, and I travelled over when it was there, and then I also got to travel over when it was opening on Broadway. And I remember myself and Louise Donlan like sitting in a dressing room in this Broadway theatre doing the seating plan for opening night, and it was like so different to, you know, doing the seating plan for Druid Lane. You know?
And did you find a sense as well? I mean, sometimes it's interesting moving from kind of college, studying art administration, doing anything in the arts, to actually practically doing it. And did you get a sense of the importance of? It might sound like a bizarre question, but the importance of the administrative side of it. They kind of bring it home to you, what a key role that has.
Yes, it did. It's interesting. I was just on a Zoom call with some producer pals just before I came on here, and I was saying to them, like, one of the things that I feel is when we do our job well, nobody knows we exist and nobody knows what it is we do. But if something goes wrong, it comes sharply into focus. if something has been not followed through or something hasn't been delivered. So I see my role as a producer to facilitate the vision of an artist and a theatre maker. And I would have felt that very much in Druid, that we were oiling the wheels to allow Gary Hines as an artistic director and the company of artists, to allow them to do the job that they wanted to do, in as stress-free a way as they could, by us taking care of the work that needs to be done in the background to make that vision happen.
Yeah, I mean, I said, how long were you with Druid for, Marie?
It's funny because I wasn't with Druid that long, but if it's so much happened in that time, I feel like I was there for years. It was maybe 3 years that I was with Druid, but just because it was the Leanan trilogy at that time, there was an awful lot was slotted into that small period of time.
Well, I mean, I think, it's like anything else. You mentioned the kind of carny word. I think it's kind of that. I think a lot of the sense, certainly for myself, even working within the kind of as a centre, it's that feeling of so much can happen within the space of 24 hours. Because I remember one of the best memories here is like Glenn Hanser did an amazing solo gig. We did two of them about a few Christmases ago. And I was chatting to him on stage, and like literally the piano was being wheeled off and the panto was being wheeled in. He kind of going, yeah. So that's kind of, I think that's what we all love, that sense of adventure and that sense.
Yeah.
But I just say there has to be. I always say my biggest part of artistic development is making sure the boiler is working in axis. Do you know what I mean? There has to be that
exactly
of the mechanisms have to be there. Did you come back to Dublin then directly after Druid, Maria?
I did. I came back to Dublin then. I actually ended up leaving Druid. We had a really tragic bereavement in Druid. Bernie Walsh was killed off his motorbike, a hit and run accident, and something of the magic died for me around that time. It was really difficult. We were a company in mourning. Everybody was impacted by that and affected by it, and just something around that period of time made me think it was time to move on now, for something else. And shortly after that, I started looking at opportunities. And it's a funny thing, like throughout my career, one of the things that I've done a few times, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, is leave the job that I was in without having something directly to go to. So I don't do it so much anymore, but previously I used to go, like, if something had come to an end, it had come to an end and it was time to leave, rather than waiting to have something to go to. So I left Druid without having a job to go to, but started looking for positions, and the position of general manager of Calypso Theatre Company came up in Dublin. And like you say, there's been a constant thread through my career. My two loves are theatre and social justice, and this combined the two.
Yeah.
So I applied for that and was delighted to get that position, and moved back to Dublin, having been away for years, and reintegrate myself back in. And something I really noticed when I moved back to Dublin first was the sunlight. There was so much more sunlight in Dublin than in Galway.
Yeah.
And less rain.
And what was happening in Calypso around that time?
So there was two new appointments. Barbara Niquive was appointed as the artistic director, and I was appointed as the general manager at that time. And it was Donal O'Kelly Donal O'Kelly was Calypso Productions, I think, up to that point, and he was on the board of directors, as was Charlie O'Neill, Kate Lennon. There was a great gang of people around there. So myself and Barbara started, and we were carrying on what had been happening in Calypso, but we were also given license to make it our own. So we were looking at facilitating Barbara's vision. But there was a structure in Calypso where a production would go on, and the productions would usually be around some social justice issue, like not necessarily hammering it on the head, but exploring a social justice issue. And then there would be an education and outreach element to it, so an education pack and a workshop series. and that really interested me, having that dual part of it, and it meant that I was in contact, depending on what the production was that we were doing and the issue that we were addressing. I was in contact with organisations that were involved in social justice in Dublin at the time, which was a passion of mine as well. So it really fitted.
Yeah, but I think as well there was, I've spoken to a few people who were kind of, around that kind of 90s, and yeah, the 90s kind of era. And it's kind of, it was a very, like, the amount of companies that were kind of in existence then across all different ranges. So Dublin was a very different place. It was, I said to me the other night, it was easier to be a poor artist because you could live, you could live on a lot easier than now. But also that sense of there was kind of a very seamless place within the arts for that social advocacy. Like, it was kind of, and companies like Subi Calypso and others, and Donal obviously still to this day. But I think it was kind of there it just seemed to be there across the board as well. That really that change, that kind of push for change.
Yeah, like, so you had like Wet Paint and Calypso and Team as well, I suppose, in the work that they were doing. And then there were things happening like the Parade of Innocence. That would have been a bit earlier than that. But those kind of initiatives, yeah, where the theatre community were involved in campaigns for change in other areas and in social justice. And yeah, there was a little bit more movement between those two sectors back there, I think.
Yeah. And did you find as well that kind of move, that kind of being one of two was a different thing? That sense of being a general manager working with an artistic director is a very different vibe,
Yeah, because like, I'd been spoiled coming out of college and going working in Druid, where we had like marketing department or marketing freelance company on call, and a production department, and everybody had their own job. And suddenly I arrived at Calypso, and I was the marketing department, and I was the production manager, and I was the general manager. And at the start, we only had one computer, I think, and doing our applications, Barbara Queeve used to write out the essay questions, as we used to call them, and I'd do the sums, and then I'd type it all into the computer. Myself and Barbara laugh when we meet now and think back that it was definitely simpler times. So it was very strange to be part of two. And also, I mean, I had been the administrator in Druid. I wasn't the person making the big decisions or signing the contracts and that. But luckily for me, Calypso was in a building in number 7 South Great Georgia Street, which had Rough Magic Films with Siobhan Burke and Kate Lennon in it. It had Cush Came Dance Theatre Company with Bridget Webster there, Barabbas Theatre Company with Enid Reid White and that. So whenever I'd have a difficulty or something I didn't know about, I'd go and I'd make a cup of tea in this tiny little kitchen that we'd have. And I'd, engineer to bump into somebody and kind of go, so Siobhan, when you're doing contracts for designers, do you find and
that Maria Fleming one drinks an awful lot of tea.
Drinks an awful lot of tea, and it's full of questions. Yes.
And what shows were done around that time, Maria?
So the first one I did was Cell with Paula Meehan.
Yeah.
And absolutely loved that. So Paula had been writer in residence in Mountjoy prison. So we spent time going, I was in and out of the female prison in Mountjoy a couple of times, exploring workshops and way to connect with that. And we did the Asylum Ball, which was written by Gavin Costick. So there was a number of different productions and looking at different issues. And then we did Guess Who's Coming for the Dinner, which was Roddy Doyle's take on the classic Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which looked at asylum seekers and direct provision in Ireland. So
I guess that even back then, I think it's funny because I remember being involved in a team kind of in and around that time, or maybe a bit later, and there was kind of there's a whole thing about Bosnia and Serbia and the breakup of Yugoslavia and refugees around that, and it seems like that's 25 years ago now, and you're looking at the same discussions still going.
I know, and it's really tragic. Like the situation in Cahir just makes me want to cry. It's just so. It's inhuman. The system that we set up, like direct provision, when it was set up, was never intended that people would be staying long term in situations. Like the system was designed for people coming in for a few months, having their case heard, and then either staying or leaving. But this limbo that it ended up being, and it's kind of followed me a little bit through my career, because then when I was working in the Arc, much later on, I did some workshops out in Clondalkin in the hotel out there with children in direct provision, and the situation, you know, the same issues as there were back in the day with Calypso still there. Direct provision just has to go. It's just cannot be allowed to remain. It's so shameful for us.
But it just seems to be an absolute blind spot as well. You know, it's kind of, it's a real bizarre one. And I think we've had it as a nation, our blind spots. I mean, you think we would have learned by our blind spots, but
yeah,
you know,
I mean, because you do hear people say that like direct provision is the Magdalene laundries of our time, and I definitely think that is. But the difference now is more and more people are hearing about it, know about it, and aren't outraged in the way they should be.
Yeah, I think there's always something else to be outraged about. That's the problem. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of. We get to that again in a minute. Go back to me. And was Barabbas then after that? Was Barabbas?
So Calypso Productions, and after Calypso, I did the same thing then with Calypso Productions. I left without having a job to go to, because I just felt, that's it now, my time has come to an end there. I've done what I came to do here. And then I actually, while I was in Calypso, I had I did a course in social development, and again looking at the issue of social justice. And I was coming into contact with different people around the issue, and I moved and started working with an organisation called AFRI, which is Action from Ireland. And I started working with them part-time as administrator, and I still continued working with Donal O'Kelly. I was working freelance, producing some of his work, including the Cambria and the Hand, which travelled over to the States. So some great times working with Donal on that. But working with AFRI, and while I was working with AFRI, I had my first child, Molly. And actually it suited, in one way, not to be head, neck and ears working in theatre as a young mum, just time-wise and childcare-wise and all that. So I stayed working with AFRI for a number of years as administrator and doing some freelance work in theatre, dipping in and out. And then I had a second child, Alice, and while I was on maternity leave with Alice, I was approached by Barabbas to see would I come in and just cover a gap period for them. Trina Niegwiver was moving to Dublin Theatre Festival, and would I come in and cover for a while. And similar to Go, I went into Barabbas for a few months and stayed there for years until I was thrown out of there when the funding was cut.
Yeah, but I mean, again, you know, I think, you know, back through, and obviously knowing you for years, you kind of forget where people, you know, you meet people in different guises throughout the years. But looking back on your CV, kind of looking to talk to you, like, again, there's brilliant companies at brilliant times. You know what I mean? Like, you know, Druid, you know, and then Calypso, and then being in Galway around that time as well. But then Barabbas, I mean, like, they were on fire. You know, it was kind of extraordinary. And I think, you know, the legacy of that company, I don't think has been explored enough in relation to the Irish theatre culture or theatre scene. They changed so much.
I remember seeing, like, I was in Galway. I think I was probably still studying in the arts in Galway, and I remember going into Nuns Island Theatre, which is still one of my favourite theatres in the country, a tiny little theatre, and seeing Barabbas's Macbeth. And I remember coming out and going, I have no idea what I just saw. I don't know what just happened. And I'm not sure whether I like it or don't like it, whether I understand it or know what's going on. But definitely, like, something different is happening here. And then, of course, down the line, I remember seeing The White-Headed Boy and just, like, blown away, like, what is going on here? What's this about? Just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then various other productions over the year. And I would have got to know the company then during my time in Calypso, because we were all in the same building in number 7. South Great Georgia Street. And then I started in Barabbas working on Circus, which I absolutely loved. And that came back then in what was reviewed in the Dublin Theatre Festival. And then we took it out to New Haven, to the Festival of Arts and Ideas in the States in New Haven. And like that production, I loved it, changed my life. And I just thought it was great. And it was great fun to work on a great group of Carney people again. It was kind of similar to it.
There's that word, you know, the minute you mentioned the word circus, I was right back there with you going on to Galway.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there is that sense of, and again, it's through your career of that, like even now it's theatre festival, of a reshaping of a space for a number of weeks. Like it's like you know, not to be flippant, like the circus coming into town, or like the carnival coming into town. Right? And that's something that's very attractive to you, that sense of disruption, or not. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would like to be seen as a disruptor. I think I think that sits well. Like maybe I wouldn't have owned that title when I was younger. Maybe I would have, thought that was a negative. But I think now, yeah, I'm up for a bit of disruption. One of the lines from Donal O'Kelly's play, The Cambria, a line from Frederick Douglass is, "Power concedes nothing without demand. It never has and it never will." So you can't just sit back and wait for the people who have the power to hand it over for you, or you can't just wait for change to happen in a positive way. You have to disrupt and you have to change. And there are times to sit and obey the rules, and there are times to expose the rules for what they are and call for change when you see it. So yeah, and I would definitely be on the side of the disruptor.
Great place to be. And so tell us that, like, Barabbas, like how long did you actually end up kind of being involved with the company?
Well, see, it's a hard one to go because our funding was cut, obviously, in that brutal cut back there. So it's hard to cut it because we continued on working without being funded, and I was working with Barabbas while at the same time working freelance gigs because there wasn't a permanent job there. So there was a period of time where I was working permanently with Barabbas. Then there was a period of time where I was working part-time and freelance with Barabbas. And also, obviously, now Raymond Keane is now my partner as well. So you could say I never gave up Barabbas.
But also as well, I suppose you mentioned it there, like, there was, during that period, like around the crash and around all that, there was a changing, like when we mentioned, and it's come up a lot kind of in the late 80s, like 90s, it was all about companies, there was a lot of work going on, loads of companies, loads of opportunities. And then, cuts, and an awful lot of things went to the wall, and not for any other reason than there was no money. Do you know what I mean? I think and it was an extraordinarily, brutal and difficult time. And as you say there, you kind of kept on working with a lot of companies, kept trying to drive forward, but in the end couldn't. And I think, that time is still having an effect on the landscape that we all work and live in now. But it amazes me, and it's kind of, you kind of hate saying it because really to our own detriment, the amount of creativity and innovation that grew out of that, and people still bloody develop work for nothing. You know what I mean? You kind of go, it's very difficult to kind of to explore and look at those things without feeling a great deal of sadness, but also a great deal of resilience, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Well, there is, the history of this will be written later. Like we're still in the middle of it, but like everybody would have their take on it. But I do feel a lot more was lost at that time than people necessarily credit. Like it wasn't just a few companies lost their funding. There was an ecology there that was broken, and we have been clambering back ever since. And for me, I feel a lot of the insecurity that there are for artists, for freelance artists, is a result of the breaking up of that system. And the reason given for breaking up the system at that time was the lack of funding, and in order to distribute more money to freelance artists and to give more people an opportunity to make work. But I don't think that that's what has happened. I think, like, here we are, you know, way down the line, and I think the life and career opportunities for freelance artists and for theatre makers is, if anything, more unstable and more inequitable. And I think one of the things about the situation that we find ourselves in the moment, and look, how far did we get before we even mentioned it? Well done, us. But like, in adversity, there's also opportunity, and I would love to see some real change happening at the moment in the model of how we work, in the way we work. I mean, a few people have mentioned it about the situation. Like, let's not go back to the way it was. It was broken.
Yeah.
So let's not race back to what people call normal, because it was not normal. I sat in the Theatre Forum conference in Wexford last June, and I was in tears listening to artists talking about the reality for them. And I know it. I mean, I live with the freelance theatre maker. My brother and his partner are freelance artists. Some of my best friends are freelance. But I had real pain listening to the stories and listening to people talking about it. And I did really feel, this can't go on. This has to change. I was already talking with some colleagues and friends of mine about, right, I want to disrupt again. I want to be part of, you know, the reason this changes, and how do we change this, and how do we make something different, and what way are we going to go about that. And then two things happened. Like, you know, I came away from the conference last June determined that I was going to do something. I wasn't just going to go, that's shocking, and then go back into my life. So I wanted to change some things. But then I got a diagnosis of cancer, and then COVID arrived. So I haven't had the chance to really explore what is the way in which I want to be part of the change that's coming. But I really want to see change. And I think it's time that we looked at the models, break it all down and start again, and put the artist and the artist's vision at the center of it. But obviously, as a producer and as an administrator, I have a huge belief in the role of the producer and the administrator and the structure behind it. And it goes back to what I was saying to you earlier. Like, I see my role as facilitating and enabling the vision of an artist or number of artists. And I know that I can do that. But we need to find a structure where I am supported to do that, but the artist is supported to make the work and to have a viable career, financially and artistically.
Yeah, no, and all that amplified by a million. And I think, for those that find us on the internet somewhere in the depths of YouTube in 20 years' time, we're at the 26th of May at the end of a kind of, or I suppose the emerging from a lockdown period because of a COVID pandemic in Ireland, but across the world. But I think you're right, Maria. I think we're kind of going on a kind of we'll come back to our story in a minute. But I do think you're right about the opportunity facing us. And I actually mean facing us in this, because if we don't face it, it's going to be a waste of time, and in relation to what could be done. Because it's not all about money. You know, money is the fuel, obviously, that's going to, but if the fuel's not going to the right places, and it's also not necessarily that the fuel have to be taken from one thing to be given to another. It's the kind of, what is the message, and what do we actually want? And I think that's the key thing about how do we figure out what do we actually want, and how do we want to do it. Because I think if you end up going back to having this conversation with someone, I don't know if it was on one of these or recently, about kind of going, the arts community has always had to fight, you know, for pieces of pies. And nearly since the time of Michael D setting up the department, there's always been a kind of not combative, but it's always been a kind of an interesting, let's say, relationship between the community. So you kind of go, what's that about? You know, you kind of go, so it's about kind of finding common ground. And then, as you say, you know, people who aren't on the same boat will make themselves very apparent, because, you know, they will just make themselves very apparent.
Yeah.
Come back to me in relation to, because around that time as well, you know, because since, you know, the area of kind of children's work and working in TYA became a huge part of your career for the next decade, I suppose, in a way. Was that something that happened organically for you?
Yeah, I hadn't planned that at all. So when the funding for Barabbas was cut, like I say, we struggled on for a few years trying to make it work, and with both myself and Raymond doing other work and doing work in Barabbas, but it was really hard. And I had 2 young children at the time, and trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to work this? And so I worked freelance, and I went throughout my career, dotted in between all of these. Anytime that happened, I seemed to go back and work in Dublin Theatre Festival for a bit in some role or other. So I'm dipping in and out of Dublin Theatre Festival all the time as I go along. And then the role of theatre programmer for the Arc came up, and there were 2 things that interested me there. One was theatre for young audiences. I had 2 of the target audience in my house at the time. And the other thing was programming. So I had worked as a general manager, as a creative producer, as a facilitator, as a special events coordinator, but I hadn't done programming. And that really interested me. So I applied for the job in the Arc, and started in, I think it was January of 2011, and in that February I found myself at a festival of theatre for children in Bologna in Italy, and like not a clue where I was or what was going on. And there was this lovely thing of it all being really familiar. I was going, this is theatre, I know how this works. We go into a space, there are seats, there's a stage, there's lighting, there's an exchange that's going on between audience and the cast, but also all completely new as well, going like, I don't know what's going on here, like this is chaos as well, what's happening here. And I had been working in theatre in Ireland for years and knew loads of people and had my network, and I knew nobody in theatre for young audiences, so you're starting again. So it felt like I was in the same country, but I'd moved to another town, and everybody here was different. And so that was like the challenge of that was really exciting. And it just grabbed me from the word go. I loved it. And one of the things that happened when I was preparing for the interview for the job, I was doing some research and I was looking at theatre for young audiences in the UK, and I came across a thing called a relaxed performance in a brochure, and I was like, I have no idea what that even means. I'd better find out. And I found out that a relaxed performance was a performance for young people who were on the spectrum, and that a number of things were done in the theatre and in relation to that performance to make it easier for that audience to come and engage with theatre. And I just thought, that is amazing, that's fantastic. Didn't come up in the interview at all. I was very disappointed after all my research. So one of the first things when I got in there, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to have a relaxed performance. And set about doing that. So again, I was able to, connect with my theatre and social justice in the same thing. And that working on that area and building that area within Theatre for Young Audiences in Ireland first, and then within Theatre for Ireland, became a passion of mine.
I mean, I think there was, I just say kind of in the intervening years, you were kind of doing, special events coordinator with the Theatre Festival, which, at one iteration is kind of highbrow, intellectual, art. And then the arrival of the mayhem of a children's program, because I think it's interesting talking to you. There is that kind of sense of that carny attitude, that kind of sense of you're working with children. You're working with children, and having spent many years working with children, it's an absolute joy, but it's an absolute mayhem as well.
Yeah. And there's a lot of tents. There's a lot of tents in theatre for children. The amount of times, like I remember one time in particular, and this was not unusual, but I remember, it was a morning, it was about 9:30 or 10 of a morning, and I was sitting cross-legged on a rug inside a yurt with my shoes off, you know, my socks on, surrounded by 3-year-olds, you know, watching a beautiful show that ended with the stage manager coming in with toast and Nutella for everybody. And I remember sitting there like with my legs crossed and going, this is my job.
But again, the arc, you know, to be there during that period, and I think that was a period of kind of different roles emerging within the organization as well. And as I said, to be what a gift to be kind of programming the kind of the children's, you know, work in the family season of the theatre festival, and was that something that you felt kind of came naturally to you? I mean, we say we're interested in programming, but the idea of working with artists, I mean, obviously you're still working it from a management point of view, but more so from a curatorial or from an artistic point of view. That's something you liked.
I loved it. It was very different. I got to do both in the ARC. I could still be a producer because for the in-house ARC productions, I would be the producer, and then the programming job was kind of alongside that. And I absolutely loved it. Like it just ticked loads of boxes for me. Going out and seeing work, meeting artists, talking to them about their work, and meeting other companies, and also because in the role of programmer, I traveled a lot, just around Europe now, not too much further than that, but I made some lifelong friends that way, like other programmers in other jurisdictions, and I became particularly drawn to, there's a festival in Edinburgh, was the company's called Imaginate, and it's the Edinburgh International Children's Festival. And I made some pals there, and one night in Germany, after seeing a particularly appalling show, myself and one of the staff members from Imaginate were sitting in my hotel room having the free beers that came in the room, talking about, you know, what do we want to do, how do we want to work, what do we want to do. And for me, there was that thing, the Scottish and the Irish, very similar in terms of sensibilities, sense of humour, population size, language. There's loads of things in common. But in terms of theatre for young audiences, Scotland punches way above its weight. Like it is streets ahead. And Ireland in some ways catching up now, but at the time when I started in the ARC, you know, some of the companies that had been there were fading, and there wasn't a lot of new companies coming on board. So there was room for, you know, sort of invigoration there. So I really wanted to work, and we started talking about how we're going to work together, and ended up applying for a EU project that worked on at the time that I was in the ARC. So it was really exciting for me. I had like international colleagues. I had work that I felt really passionate about. I was able to still produce, but also program work. And then, you know, addressing, still being a disruptor, you know, addressing some issues that I wanted to see addressed in the work. You know, when I would be programming for the Theatre Festival, and I also programmed for the Dance Festival, you know, I frequently got emailed letter of complaints from parents, you know, outraged, and I would feel I had done my job there.
And what sort of in that, was there a style of work that kind of drew you, or was it kind of, was there any particular, you know, you obviously mentioned you went into kind of clowning, you went into kind of the physical theatre, you went into kind of circle, but in relation to the kind of TYA work, was it work that you saw that you kind of went, oh?
Yeah, and interestingly, I was still drawn a lot to the physical theatre. So there was a lot of clown shows programmed in the ARC across my time there, and physical theatre shows. But I wasn't really familiar with theatre for young audiences until I started in that job, and some of the work that I've seen has blown me away. Like some of the work I've seen is the best theatre I've seen, not just theatre for young audiences. And I love work that challenges the young audience, that doesn't disrespect them or patronize them in any way, and that addresses, you know, real life issues that are going on for children. Like most people, that work in theatre. Like, I do feel that theatre is a way for us to understand who we are and why we are in the world, and it's no different for children. And I love work that, you know, really challenges them and shows them what's going on. I remember programming one piece in the dance festival, L'Après Midi d'Enfants, and it was a French company that had these plastic bags that they cut out and shaped to look like people. And there was one dancer who performed in the middle of the show, and he made these plastic bags on stage. And then there were 6 fans dotted around the stage, which fitted in the arc perfectly, in the circle of the arc. And he would turn on the fans, and the plastic bags would dance with each other. And it would start with one dancer and then a duet, and then there were dancers like all up, you know, and it was so magical and so beautiful. And then at a certain moment he would go and he would get his scissors and he cut up all the plastic bags and they stopped dancing. And like, parents were horrified, you know. But there was, I remember, we had maybe 10 performances of that in the Arc, and I sat in on every single one. And in one of them there was one young boy, and like everybody was sitting down, and when he came out, and like everybody was like oohing and ahhing at the dancing bags, and when he came out with scissors, one boy stood up and went, "Yes!"
Yes.
And the company, we would do Q&As afterwards with the company, and the company said they would answer any question except, why does he cut up the plastic bags?
Wow.
And they would throw that question back to the audience and they go, why do you think he cuts up the plastic bags?
Wow. And
one of the last shows, I programmed a show, but I had actually left by the time it came to there. But one of the last shows that I programmed was a show called We Come From Far Away. And it was a theatre piece for young audiences, which was the story of 2 young boys, 2 young asylum seekers coming from Syria to Norway. And one of the boys drowns on the crossing on the boat. And you would think, you know, how are you going to make that work for young audiences and not traumatize them, and for it not? And it was so beautifully done and so beautifully performed, and that again captured for me, you know, my 2 passions.
Yeah.
Beautiful piece.
And around that time as well, Maria, like, you know, I suppose the policy strategic kind of head on you got involved with, you know, Assetege over in the festival over in Birmingham, and
yeah,
EYA Ireland, you know, so it's kind of, I've been fascinated with that kind of, that, you know, in some ways, disruption through structure, if you know what I mean, that kind of actually, that, you know, not all disruption has to be breaking things down, it can be kind of building things up as well, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really impacted by, there's a woman in Scotland, Rona Matheson, and she founded a company called Star Catchers, which is for very young audiences, early years. It took me a long time to come around to early years work, you know, which is plays for babies, you know. And I went along to the first few, and I was going, is that not just play? I don't know that that's theatre. Is that play or is it theatre? Anyway, I've come around. But I remember hearing her speak, and she was saying that her mission in Star Catchers was to instigate societal change in Scotland through theatre for babies. And I went, like, geez, you don't want much. But I loved the ambition of it, and I was going, I want the same. I want to see drastic change in Ireland as a result of theatre for young audiences. And I remember talking to Phil Kingston, the outreach officer in the Abbey, and I remember going to him and I was saying, you know, we're going to join the committee in TYA, and we're going to institute, you know, drastic changes in Ireland through theatre for young audiences. And he was going, right, I'm up first. So, and the theatre for young audiences sector is, you know, it's really vibrant. There's some incredible people working in that sector. There's some great ambition, and I've stayed involved with it. I'm kind of stepped a bit to the side, but I've stayed involved with it. I'm still on the committee, and I do believe that so much can be achieved. I think it's going to be really important in the next while, you know, that what we're experiencing now, there's going to be huge trauma, and young people have been taken out of schools, they've been taken away from their friends, they've been separated from their grandparents, some of them have suffered loss, and I think theatre for young audiences can play a brilliant part in the healing and recovery that we're going to need after this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then you go off and put your money where your mouth is and go off to Greece.
I
To
went off to Greece. Yeah.
it's like
Now I get similar.
I'm going to go to Greece. Yeah.
And it always seems to be following a family member. So I followed my brother to West Africa. I followed my sister to Greece. So my sister and her husband had gone over to Greece to the island of Chios. And by the time I went over there, they'd been over there maybe 3 or 4 times. And each time they stayed a couple of months. So they were really embedded in this organization, CERST, which is Chios Eastern Shore Response Team. And it's a wholly volunteer organization, and it came from a resident on the island of Chios, this woman Tula. She is an amazing individual, and she was woken up in the middle of the night one time to a boat landing on the beach beside her house, and she was horrified at the conditions for refugees who were landing on the shores in Chios. And she started working with a few people to try and help in whatever way she could, and that grew and grew into an organization that was meeting every boat landing and providing food and clean, dry clothes and tea and some form of welcome to every boat landing that happened in Chios. And then people would move from the beaches or the harbour. The police would bring them to be processed, and they would go into the camps. When I went first, there were 2 camps in Chios. There's just one now. And CERST would continue to provide people with clothing, with language school. So it was my sister and her husband who set up a language school on Chios for people there, and they could learn English and Greek or German, depending on where the refugees wanted to go. CERST would also help people with their legal process of going through interviews for asylum. And it's a really, really humbling experience to be present at a boat landing when refugees arrive on a beach, and to see the process that they're put through would make you ashamed. In the same way that I'm ashamed of direct provision in Ireland, I'm ashamed of the asylum process in Europe and the situation for people coming out of the sea.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been, so, as you say, humbling and extraordinary, because it's, no one ever speaks about the privacy moments of like these things of very vulnerable people. You know, it's always viewed as kind of a large scale thing, but within each of those large scale things is a person extraordinarily vulnerable in a very private space, arriving to a place they have no idea where they are, and just that sense of it's nearly too big to kind of, unless you're present there, to kind of take in.
Yeah, like it is the individual stories and getting to know people. And similar to the direct provision system in Ireland, the camps in Greece are only set up, initially for people to literally pass through, and they're supposed to be having their asylum case heard and either be returned or pass on into Europe. But that's not what's happening. People are trapped for years on the island of Chios in really appalling conditions. And one of the projects on Chios keep changing because the rules as well of what's permissible in Greece change all the time. But at the time that I was there, one of the projects was the Children's House. So that was a building that was in the centre of Chios. And after people had landed and had been processed and gone to the camp, they could then come to the Children's House, where we would there was a hot shower, and you could families could come and could have a shower. They could get a change of clothes. We had colouring books and crayons. We had toys. We would do movie nights for families. And the shower facilities that are in the camp, they're communal, and it's not suitable for children. It's really dangerous for children. For all sorts of ways. Like in a basic way, there was one child there who had a really badly cut foot from standing on a razor that somebody had left on the floor of the showers in the camp. But I remember being in the Children's House one day, and there was different jobs you could do. My job that day was managing shower, like helping people with toiletries and towels and timing wise, and shouting at teenage girls to get out of the shower because somebody else had to have a go. And there were two girls who were the same age as my two daughters at home at the time, and I was having great giggles with them through I don't speak Farsi, and they had some English, but we were having great giggles, and I was plaiting their hair and that, and then one of them just turned to me and said, "Do you live in a house?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Game over.
Yeah. No, it is, and it's kind of, it's you sense, you kind of sense the empathy, or it's very natural to kind of get drawn into kind of private conversations and private spaces with people, and then something like that just yanks you back out into the reality of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, I consider myself privileged to have shared the experiences I shared with people over there. There was one Syrian man, who sat down and shared his story with me, the journey, where he had come and that, and I sat over 2 different nights with him, and I wrote, he told me the story of his journey, and I wrote it down, and it's just unbelievable what people go through. And there was one, I didn't attend that many boat landings. I went for a week one time, and then I went back for 2 weeks over Christmas the following year. And like I say, my sister and her husband have been over there for months and months and months. At the time that I was over at Christmas, there was one boat landing, and it was like off in a rural part of the island, and there was a very elderly woman came in on the boat with her son. Like, her son was elderly, never mind her, and she wasn't well, so there was always a medical team would be at the boat landings as well. So the medical team were sorting her out while we were sorting everybody else out with clothes and food. And then I was asked to go over and bring her over clothes and food, and the medical team left her, and there were a number of things that they had found. She was very unwell, and she had to sit on the ground. She couldn't stand. It was quite cold. It had started to rain, and she's sitting on the ground, and I brought her over the food and the clothes, and she took my hand and she started talking to me again in Farsi. I didn't understand a word she said, and I was trying to explain to her I don't speak Farsi, and she didn't speak English, and there was nobody else around us at that time. And I just sat, and she held my hand and I held her hand, and she just talked to me. I have no idea what she told me, but I just remember thinking, this woman should not be sitting here on the ground in the cold. She should be by a fireside in wherever she's from with her grandchildren around her. And we've done something drastically wrong in the world where this ends up happening.
Yeah, and when it's normalized as well, when it becomes, it's gas.
She's just a number. She's just one of those people in the camp in Greece, those people who are coming.
Yeah, it seems to be that we kind of have turned into a world where if things happen for a long enough time, it makes them normal.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not in the news anymore. People don't talk about it, and like, people are outraged and horrified, and that. Like, I mean, I forget about it for chunk. Like, having been there and seen it, and I know it. I'm still like on the Facebook groups with the workers over there, but I forget for chunks of time that this is still happening, and it's still horrific.
And then you came home, and as you said, you've kind of had a tumultuous last couple of years. Dublin Theatre Festival again, in your life. But yeah, to be kind of, to be in that role now as GM and general manager, and yeah, in such a kind of, in some ways a job that kind of encompasses nearly everything of what you've done thus far, that must be kind of special.
It is. I really enjoyed it. And so Trina Quiver, who had been general manager of Barabbas, moved to be general manager of Dublin Theatre Festival. So this is the second time I followed her, and the second time I had a handover period with Trina Quiver. We had great laughs over that, and she was doing the same as me. She had left. She was leaving Dublin Theatre Festival with nothing particular to go. She knew she wanted to write and create, and she wanted to do her own work. She wanted to spend more time with her children, and she wanted to do some freelance work. But I remember joking with her, after, following her to Barabbas and then following her to Dublin Theatre Festival, saying to her, like, I can't wait to see what we're doing next, Trina. But it's been great being in Dublin Theatre Festival. Like, I have a huge love for the theatre festival from years back, you know. So obviously I've produced work that was part of the festival, from Roddy Doyle's Guess Who's Coming for the Dinner to Donal O'Kelly's The Hand to Circus with Barabbas. So I have produced work that's in the festival. And then I had programmed the family season of the Dublin Theatre Festival for 6 years in the Arc. So it kind of felt like coming home in one way. And also I'd been in Dramsoc with yourself and Willie, you know, so Willie and I knew each other well as well. And I'd worked with Stephen in there in relation to the family season. That, so it did feel very much like coming home. And I mean, so much of my career in theatre has been influenced by work that I've seen in the festival over the years. And, you know, whenever I sit down to think about the big theatre works that have impacted me, you know, when you get those Facebook things of, you know, 5 shows you've seen that have changed your, you know, well, then I come back to things like Small Metal Objects or Waves that I've seen in Dublin Theatre Festival. So to be part of it is very exciting. And yeah, opening night of the festival, you know, has been great for me. Yeah, so I love it. Yeah.
As I say, we're kind of in the midst. You know, you've been through a kind of a mad you yourself, as you say, and kind of heading. We're now in a kind of mad period of time for kind of everybody, and it's something interesting that, you know, when you mentioned about the social justice, something that kind of comes up an awful lot when you talk to people in the arts, particularly ones that are involved in kind of any sense of advocacy or campaigning, whatever, is that separation of how does one separate yourself from your work, especially on an island that's kind of so small. It's kind of, you know, it's very difficult, as you say, to kind of sometimes get a handle on it, or kind of create your own safe space, your own space that's not kind of in public view, and that must be hard.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose with age, I care less about separating myself. Like, because I do remember, like, I instigated the Angels for Yes during the Repeal the Eighth campaign. And I was aware coming into Dublin Theatre Festival, you know, as general manager, you know, that might be difficult for them, but thankfully the chair of the board said to me, we knew what we were getting. So in one way, I don't, of course, I have a responsibility as general manager of Dublin Theatre Festival to represent Dublin Theatre Festival. And when I am involved with advocacy work or campaigning, I'm representing Maria Fleming.
Yeah.
I'm not representing Dublin Theatre Festival, but I'm not pretending that I'm not doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it is to be clear, and I mean, I think people understand that as well. And I think sometimes we're too careful around what we say and who we are and what we do. And I think, like I said earlier, I had a cancer diagnosis then last year, just before the festival as well. And that seems to have come with the form of Tourette's. I think, like, whatever I was like beforehand, I think I say it as I see it now a lot more. And I think that's who I'll be for whatever the remainder is.
But even the strength of character, though, around, you know, because that was particularly in the last kind of months of that, like, you know, you've been very publicly active in relation to your cancer, in relation to, you know, has that been difficult to kind of bridge that for yourself?
It was kind of a decision that I took. Obviously, anybody, when you get a cancer diagnosis, it's a huge shock. You're not expecting it. It's not part of your plan for your life. I was the third person in my family to be diagnosed with cancer, though. My twin brother Brian had been diagnosed with cancer a number of years ago. My mum had just recovered from cancer treatment at the time that I was diagnosed, so it was familiar territory to me. And when I started, my sister took me for the day I got diagnosed. They brought me. I had to go back up to the hospital for an MRI for them to see what the extent was. And my sister drove me, and she was driving me home, and you know, we were talking about, right, what's facing us, what's ahead. So, you know, they had told me you're probably looking at 1.5 years in terms of treatment. Now it has turned out to be shorter than that. But my sister said to me, she said, "Oh, look, knowing you, you'll end up being the poster girl for cancer, and you'll be running some campaign funding for something or other around it." And I remember being horrified that I couldn't, like, who does she think I am? And like, boy, like that, how inappropriate to say that now. And then a short few months later, the experience that I have of it was your world shrinks when you get a cancer diagnosis, when you start into treatment. Your world becomes hospitals, appointments, family, home, and you can start to disappear. And for some people, that might be what they want for a period of time, to not be seen, to be quiet, to recover, to heal. But also there was a sense of, am I not allowed to be this? Am I not allowed to have cancer? And do I have to stay in and be quiet and be home to make other people feel comfortable about the fact of their wellness, to not be around me when I'm sick? And I decided that I'm going to be visible. I'm going to be who I am. And I also felt that in some ways I might be able to help somebody else who's struggling with it, because I feel strong enough to be visible. And for somebody who doesn't feel that, that's fine, they don't have to be visible, but maybe seeing somebody else who's going through what they're going through might help them. And also I was aware my prognosis is very good because of early detection, and I knew that that was something that I could campaign on, that I could say to people, get it checked out as soon as there's something, get it checked out. And then around the COVID happening, there was a difficulty for people with cancer. So the Cancer Society asked me if I was happy to be part of some campaigns they were doing. So like my sister said, I became the poster girl. So I felt I felt that I was strong enough to do it. I felt for myself it was important for me not to disappear once I became ill, to still be visible. And if that could help somebody else, that would be brilliant. But also it was helping me. It helped me stay visible.
Yeah. Well, there's not much more I can say, actually, Maria, because you just basically explained there in the last 2 minutes what a powerhouse of person you are. And I don't mean that in a kind of a, driving tanks through things, but that kind of sense of honesty and integrity and kind of being yourself, that is kind of, it's such a joy to be around, and it shows in all the work that you do. And I think we all can't wait just to get back out of this this frame that we're in, to kind of, as you say, plan and really discuss about what we can actually do to make a difference. Because I think there's a lot of us that are feeling those thoughts. There's a lot of us that are kind of, well, why would you go back to something that we were all dissatisfied with,
Yeah.
But can we look at, thanks a million for joining me. It's been an absolute joy to chat to you. And I look forward to having a couple with you again very, very soon.
Yeah, let's disrupt soon. Thanks, Mark.
No worries.